Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who stories, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Before we begin, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, also known as COPPA, they reached a settlement with the United States government where they implemented new policy meant to dodge responsibilities and scapegoat creators, meaning I have to ensure everyone understands that this video is not meant for children. It is not marketed towards kids. It is not advertised towards kids. It is Doctor Who is a family show that kids can watch, but this video, as with all the videos on my channel, are looking at it from an adult perspective, and therefore viewer discretion is advised. It is the 20th of March 2021, and we are starting a look at Paradise 5, the fifth release in the Lost Stories range, and one that is very different. This is a release that was actually not proposed for the original Season 23, but the Season 23 that came in the form of Trial of a Time Lord. Now, the first two serials in Trial of a Time Lord were there from the beginning, but the third one, which would eventually be Terror of the Vervoids, actually went through several options. Originally, it was going to be a series of linked two-parters, Attack from the Mind and The Second Coming, but those were dismissed for budgetary reasons. And then it was either going to be a new story from Christopher H. Bidmead or possibly a reworked version of The Hollows of Time, but those were done. And then you came to P.J. Hammond's Paradise 5, a promotion that John Nathan Turner simply didn't like, so it was dismissed. A script for the first episode was written, and a outline for the last three were written, and it was originally going to reveal that the Valeyard had a hand in the events. Now, obviously that has been adapted out, and Paradise 5 on audio is very different. For one, of course, Peri is the companion instead of Mel, and the scripts are co-written by Andy Lane. And part one is actually really interesting. It's a great premise. You have the continuing sort of story of the Doctor and Peri trying to find a good holiday where they rest, which is very, very fun and kind of enjoyable, but even if it's not necessarily the most amazing premise or the most perfect thing that you have, they find a Doctor's old friend has gone to this place called Paradise 5. Now, the first half of the episode actually takes place on this world, which is essentially made from ticker tape, in a very interesting analysis of consumerism that I think is actually going to play into what the rest of Paradise 5 does. This is a very politically charged story. Paradise 5, of course, being a pleasure resort, like this holiday resort, which is a very low staff, nearly everything's automated. There are these cherubs running around, played by some of the cast. Helen Goldwyn does quite a few of them. James D'Arcy and Andre Bernard are basically the three cherubs, while Alexander McQueen, who we will get to some of his other Doctor Who roles, just you wait. He's really fun. He plays Gabriel, this sort of suave, charming leader, and Peri is employed as a hostess. This is actually a story that is really... this first episode is really, really proactive for Peri. Peri does the investigating while the Doctor just tries to sneak aboard and sneak backstage, which is great. And the Doctor basically gets a message from the chairs to beware the Elohim. Obviously, you get some religious imagery here, which is important. And just the idea here of this pleasure planet is... it makes for a very chilling first episode. You have, the Doctor and Peri investigating things. Peri even comments on sort of the sexism of having these beautiful hostess ladies basically basically having to bend to the guests' every whim, which is again, it's this very, it makes the story feel off kilter. It's a it's a different it's a very different sort of thing, and it's this it's this very it's this very very different, again, it's very different, and I like it. You have this great mystery, and it's a great it's it's a great little uh um it's this great little idea of a story where the characters just sort of, you just sort of see them as they are, um and it just opens up the mystery, and it opens up sort of the commentary here, and I love it. I'm gonna have to give part one of Paradise 5 a 9 out of 10. It is the 21st of March 2021. I just finished listening to part 2 of Paradise 5. Part 2 is where things get quite a bit darker, and, well, you don't get a lot of answers. You start to peel back some of the layers and essentially try to figure out what's going on Paradise 5. One of the most important aspects of this story is actually the fact that, well, the Doctor is actually not really experiencing stuff. He is essentially hiding out in this second episode. There is a there is a lot here where the Doctor is stuck essentially behind scenes, trying to get to the to the front of house to essentially find out what's going on, while Peri is not quite struggling, but is still having her issues with Michael and Gabriel, Gabriel especially, essentially starts to actually suspect her, as perhaps not all that she seems. Of course, that makes sense. Peri isn't all that she seems. She's really trying to find her way to basically to find her own sort of her own sort of life, in this thing, and figuring out what's going on, while while the Doctor is just there, in the background, making plans, making little things. This is also one where you really get a sense that this is a big critique on capitalism and sort of the rise of consumerism in the 1980s. Again, this would have been made in 1986, and having the planet down below be a planet made essentially of ticker tape. And, you know, there's a lot of implications that the food isn't good, that Paradise 5 is essentially the only... It's for the uber-rich and the poor that are actually getting sent up there. Well, the regular working class, a.k.a. everyone who isn't an elite. Well, it's implied that they are being basically being tricked, and you know, into by the luxury, by the thought of, oh, if we can go to these if we can, you know, get this trip to Paradise 5, we can actually live like kings and like you know, live like we are, you know, large and in charge, something that is obviously tempting but not necessarily, you know, a good thing. It is a you know, you have Peri serving a guest who then disappears, and it is essentially implied that the Doctor, you know, that you know, he is gone, and you know, we get actually some scenes with the character of Michael, with Gabriel played by James D'Arcy, and of course Gabriel is Alexander McQueen. You get this seedy sort of off-color relationship where you're, you know, they're sacrificing people to what are essentially the Elohim, and we don't know entirely what that entails. We know that there is something going on. Between them, and we know that the Elohim are doing stuff, but Peri it's essentially a psychological study of Peri losing her mind and the Doctor just trying to figure out what's going on. And I love what this episode does. Is it ensures that the listener has a sense that something strange is going on. We know that weird things are happening on Paradise 5. You know, this is not your normal thing. And kind of the direction actually from Barnaby Edwards kind of also helps that. Having this season be done by a bunch of different directors with actually I think helps give each story a distinct feel, and it especially helps this story feel like, okay, here's the weird bits, here's the thing that is you know, going on. You know, there's really just you know, something there underlying where you have our story ready to be told. You know, it's a very different sort of story where you don't know exactly where, you know, where we're going to end up, and that's also part of the things. We don't know where things you know, it's this different sort of thing, and you get this idea that there is a danger, and that danger is ever present, and you don't quite know what the danger is going to hold. So you're just left thinking, okay, this might be, you know, this is genuinely a sort of dangerous story where you have all the characters sort of just trying to go through, and you're trying to get the idea. So, you know, you absolutely really get just sort of the perfect episode here for the second part, and having these be this story also works really well in the as a 4-parter, and I don't think it would work nearly as well as like a 2-parter. That first cliffhanger especially would not work, whereas the second one probably would. But it's definitely an interesting story. So I'm gonna have to give part 2 of Paradise 5 an 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 21st of March 2021. I just finished listening to part 3 of Paradise 5. And this is where things take a further turn for the dark, especially with the reveal at this episode's cliffhanger. A lot of this episode is concerned with exploring the Paradise Machine, bringing the Doctor into the action, which is actually important because, the Doctor hadn't actually been in the story as action, like, before this episode. He had been in the a background player, biding his time, trying to figure things out, like in, and specifically in this episode, he's figured out, okay, here's where I can go to here's where we can ask these questions and possibly make progress in getting answers without necessarily getting the answers. He finds a way to sort of integrate himself with the guests, and you see that as sort of the way that the Doctor slowly realizes kind of what's going on. That the guests are actually disappearing, as this is one where every single character is slowly disappears on their way in, and until the Doctor is called that a good friend has a message for him in the communications suite in room 101. Obviously, room 101 is a reference to 1984, and, sort of the ominousness to the listener, if the listener is familiar with 1984, that sort of keys the listener in on this ominous point. But Hammond and Lane also have a really surreal start to this story. As this episode, now the last cliffhanger involves the Doctor finding a businessman and then being attacked. This businessman has been on Paradise 5 for like 3 weeks, knows something about the Elohim, but you don't ever actually know what that might be. You just get sort of the idea that, okay, the Elohim are a thing. In this episode, it sort of goes a little more in depth, and you get a little more towards the idea that they are actively fighting some sort of battle. And in that way, first you get the idea that, okay, the bodies of the guests are essentially ejected and decomposed, which is, already gruesome enough, but it becomes even more gruesome when the cliffhanger arises, and the minds of those people are actually trapped in the Cherubs. The Cherubs are our evil point, which is already a fascinating sort of thing, but just a dangerous thing. You get this bit of danger there that the characters have to sort of immediately come to terms with the danger of the Cherubs being not being the adorable little servants, but are actually people being forced to serve against their will. It adds an extra layer of terror to Paradise 5. I also have to say that the characters of Michael and Gabriel, as they appear here, are also quite fascinating. Simply because, Michael actually comes out of his booth in this episode, and you really get this sort of caring relationship between the two of them, that this is all really sort of a business deal between them and whatever the Elohim actually are. They realize something is up with the Doctor and Peri, that the Doctor and Peri perhaps aren't as proper guests as they should be, because you have Stella specifically explaining to Peri what she's been seeing, and ignoring simply because, well, this is a job. Again, that sort of added pressure of, this is still a job, and it's still, people will look the other way if it means they can survive another day, and have shelter and essentially have their needs met. Something that is played off as dark and played off as dangerous, and I really enjoy just how much of that conceit is present here in this audio. It's a brilliant sort of subversion, and it makes you ask the question, okay, what actually are our characters doing? What do they need? What do they want? What are their desires? Why would they be looking the other way? Why is this story taking this route? And you ask yourself these questions, and you get yourself lost in what is a really dark but certainly enjoyable adventure, where the Doctor and Peri are essentially on their own, trying to find a way out. And you have that gut punch that leaves you, and you just think, okay, where is this going to end up? How is this? And you sort of get the idea that this probably won't be the happiest of endings, and I absolutely love that. It's a great sort of change, and it makes you think, and it makes you wonder, okay, what's this? What could this story really be meaning? And what could we be doing here? What are the Elohim? Why are they trying to fight a war with humans? And all that's really where this final episode has to go. So overall, I am going to have to give part 3 of Paradise 5 another perfect 10 out of 10. It is the 22nd of March, 2021. I just finished listening to part 4 of Paradise 5. This 4th episode is such a brilliant ending for the story. It's also a very dark ending. A lot of the characters don't actually make it out alive. And I wonder, actually, if that is part of the reason why this was cancelled in the first place. Sure, it could easily... You can always... It could be blamed on the budget, but I wonder if, because in season 23, people might remember that the season 22 was criticized for its violence, and the BBC essentially demanded that a lot of the violent elements were toned down for the next season, if they were even allowed to get the season, and humorous elements replaced them. So that makes me wonder if perhaps perhaps the actual ending was perhaps meant just to, this was maybe what actually stopped this, because this is a story where a lot of people sacrifice themselves for the greater good. It also kind of feels it feels a lot like like the villains get away scot-free, and you don't have what could be a different sort of a different sort of story where things end on a particularly bleak and particularly dramatic note, where you have to deal with all the characters essentially coming to an end, where there is death. The cherubs don't actually survive this adventure. There's a lot of it which is essentially done through it's essentially done through this different idea of everything sort of coming to some sort of not quite a conclusion, but some sort of consensus where the characters can really get this sense of closure, so that everything that the story does ends happily, or at least ends where you can see the ending in sight as an overall good. Like, the story ends with, instead of the Doctor describing their possible next journey, Peri suggests Manhattan, where nothing could go wrong. This is, again, this sort of is a story where you do actually kind of feel the breakdown of the Doctor and Peri's morale here. As characters, they are both very tired at this point of just the constant traveling, and that has been ending just in death and destruction, and you don't necessarily get to have the happy endings that you are used to. There is most definitely an understanding between the two, of how close they are. You have just about everything, everything built up to the to where the characters perhaps can survive, and where perhaps the perhaps where the story has its ideas most prevalently built to. Hammond and Lane provide an amazing outlet for the story to really, you really get a lot of what they're doing here as definitely answering some of these questions, these big fundamental questions of are we, of what Paradise 5 is. You kind of have you have the Elohim as this great sort of godlike threat, and a real examination of sort of consumerism, capitalism, and really how the story does you know which is it's this very very different this very different sort of story where you don't get to see such a great end, but you see something just kind of happen, and it's all very dark, and it just deals with a lot of really interesting themes, and I think a lot of themes that are really in fact really good, and kind of important to actually talk about. There's of course a lot there, and so overall I'm gonna have to give part 4 of Paradise 5, the ending, another 10 out of 10. That being said, we added the scores and averaged them out to give Paradise 5 a final score of 9.75 out of 10, bringing this story to a close, and this episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon to a close. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell icon so you don't miss an upload. Let me know, do you like the story? Do you dislike it? Have you heard it? Have I maybe convinced you to pick it up? And join me next time when we take a look at one of these stories commissioned for the original season 23 as a backup story from writer Barbara Klug and adapted by Mark Platt with Doctor Who Point of Entry.